Hey guys, welcome back to the channel. I'm Callie.
And I'm Bean.
So today we are going to talk to you about our top 3 books. Just kind of like our favorite books, things that we really like to read if we're down, automatic rereads,
Yearly rereads. I have a couple of those that I reread every year just because they're comfort, they're what got us into reading, they're what kind of keep us reading too, so.
Yep, so these are just sort of books that kind of hold special places in our hearts. We are not discussing Harry Potter, because it's a given.
I mean, it's like a yearly reread is Harry Potter, and that would just be pointless for us to add that in.
Yeah, like, I reread Harry Potter. I'm pretty sure I'm, always reading Harry Potter.
This is true.
No Harry Potter. Sorry to disappoint. We do love it,
although
it is number 1. My first book, it is a little loved, so ignore the condition of this book. And that is Deep Blue by Jennifer Donnelly. This is a mermaid book, as you can tell.
On brand.
Yes. I picked this series because I stopped reading in all of college. I never really read anything. So I ended up buying this probably in the middle of college, whenever this came out, which was 2014. So I would have been so this was right after freshman year. So this was right after freshman year of college, of me thinking, oh, I have time to read. Ooh, look, Pretty Mermaid on the cover. I bought it. It sat at my parents' house until I read it the summer after I graduated college. I read it in 2017. Yeah. So I read this in 2017 after I finished college, and it just sort of jump-started me back into my love of reading. I've always loved to read. When I was a kid, I always had a book in my hand. I always went to book releases, thank you. So this just sort of propelled me back into my love of reading, and by the time I read all of them, or by the time I read this one, all the other books were out. So that was convenient.
There you go.
Very convenient. And I loved this story. We follow a mermaid princess who's not Ariel. Her name is Serafina. Thank you. And mermaids' magic is in how well they can sing and form words quickly, is where all their power and magic comes from. So on the day of Sarah's rite of passage as a princess, and it's basically like this big trial to determine if she's worthy to be queen one day, because it's a matriarchy, her entire kingdom is attacked by a neighboring country, and also humans, which merpeople and humans have never worked together. Merpeople obviously hate humans. So everything is just taken over, and she escapes and realizes what she has to figure out a way to win back her kingdom, fight, and she meets other girls from other areas. There's a whole each sea is its own kingdom. Yeah, she goes and finds all these they're not princesses necessarily, so I think 1 or 2 are, but all these other girls to try and find these artifacts to stop an ancient evil from waking up.
Alright, so my first book that I'm going to talk about here is also a mermaid book, which is kind of funny because I am not a mermaid person, I'm a dragon person. But it's Into the Drowning Deep by Mira Grant. This is a book about killer mermaids, so that's a thing.
You know.
But I actually read this book last year, and I could not stop talking about it. Oh my gosh, it's so amazingly well written. And this was one of my first exposures to Mira Grant's writing. I have since read a little bit more of what she has written, and I am loving everything so far. I really am. And so this book follows several different characters. We start off with... So this book does not actually follow mermaids in this one. Mermaids are a creature. So this is from the human point of view.
Okay.
It takes place aboard a research vessel. Ooh. Who has heard about these sirens. And actually they had a previous research vessel went out, and that's kind of the prelude to this book, is that a research vessel goes out and they disappear. No one hears from them again, and suddenly their ship washes ashore, and is found, and it's just covered in blood, and there's no one left living, and they're getting all of these messages, all of these old recordings that are them screaming and calling for help, and saying that they're being attacked by these creatures. And so it basically sparks this new research vessel that goes out with our main characters. And they basically are trying to find out what happened to this first vessel. And it's not a spoiler for me to say that it's killer mermaids, because it says so right on the back. And it is terrifying. It is very well done. And when I say that, I mean there is science in this book. Like, they make it into a science book as well. I absolutely loved this stuff. Like, they're not the fairy tales in this book. They're not. They eat humans. Like, they will come on and they will just bite your head off.
Nom-noms.
Yes, literally. And it's a very intense story, but it is so well done.
I'm gonna be real basic with my next favorite. It's A Quarter of a Century. Really, anything. I fell in love with Sarah J. Maas's writing last fall. I was in just kind of meandering the bookstore, as one does. I was actually by myself this time because I lived in a smaller town. I hadn't moved out here yet. And I was meandering, and the clerk came up, and she was our age, and she came up, and she's like, well, what do you usually like to read? And I'm like, well, I'm getting back into reading. I've so far really like fantasy books and all of that. And she directed me to A Court of Thorns and Roses and was like, well, this is a Beauty and the Beast retelling, but with fae. And I'm like, okay. So I read that one. And at this point in time, I was trying not to binge series. I was trying to break it up with other books. I tried that with this series. That worked out well. I just read through A Court of Thorns and Roses and needed answers. Actually, after A Court of Thorns and Roses, it wasn't as pressing. I will say that. A Court of Thorns and Roses, it could have been a standalone if it ended just there. It could have been. Could have. I'm glad it didn't. Because then my baby, after this one... No. I ran to the... I finished this book on my day off. And I immediately drove to my bookstore, and she was there, and she's like, oh, do you need the second one? No, I need the third. She's like, oh. So, but this one, with all of them, and I know there's still more coming out, but I know that there are more novellas, this book was so good. I just love Sarah J. Maas's writing. I love her characters. I love the people we meet in this book. Like, I do love A Court of Thorns and Roses. And if you've read the series, you understand why this one's my favorite. 'Cause reasons that I can't say.
I also haven't read these.
She hasn't, no. I'm trying. Don't worry, guys, I'm trying.
Don't judge me too hard.
After I finished the last book, or the last one that's out, A Court of Frost and Starlight, I was again back at the bookstore needing something to read. And she's like, well, have you read her other series? And I'm like, her what now? And then I was introduced to Throne of Glass, and I do love Throne of Glass a lot, but I think that this book is what made me fall in love with Sarah J. Maas.
So you talked earlier about having a book that was well loved. Well, I got you beat. This one no longer has a dust jacket.
It's sad.
So it looks thick, but it's because it's 3 books in one. This is a collection of books by Ibbotson. So these 3 books came out at separate times, and my mom got me this bind up probably in like 2000. So I was like 10 when she got me this bind up. And it has my 2 favorites in here are Witch Witch and The Secret of Platform 13. Island of the Aunts is also really good, but whenever I need to sit down and read a book that I don't have to think about, I sit down and read these, because they're kind of my first... Okay, take this a little bit with a grain of salt, but it was my first introduction to any sort of gothic humor. Witch Witch is probably my favorite one in this book, and it follows a land where this big sorcerer is trying to find a witch that he's going to marry, and he wants the evilest witch in the land. And we follow this girl who is not evil at all. She is like the goody two-shoes. She flowers spring up while she walks. and she, like, saves this little boy who all the other witches are trying to torture, and this sorcerer decides to have a contest to see who is going to be... So he decides to have a contest, and in this contest, they have to come up with different evil things that they're gonna do. And so, like, a pair of twins, they make a bottomless pit. And then one of my favorite characters is actually his butler, who's the one who's basically, like, cleaning up after all of these witches.
Everyone loves the butler.
Basically, they go through, and he's like, alright, well, she needs the head of a mongoose, and, like, this, and this, and this. And the butler's like, fine, I'll go get it. And it's so funny. And then our main character comes in, and suddenly she can do, like, this really dark magic.
My last favorite book I read in high school, it was actually a mandatory read in my senior year of high school, and that is The Book Thief by Markus Zusak. I fell in love with this book. I actually had to get, this is my newer book, because I read this my senior year. Because the class I had to take was world literature.
Oh.
Yeah. I don't have my original copy. One, because it is destroyed, because I wrote in it a lot. I tabbed it, I dog-eared it, I did all the bad things to it. I don't know what it is about this book, if it's the fact that Death is the narrator, or just, I love the characters, the fact that it's a book about a book lover. I don't know why, because I'm not big into World War II. I know that's, like, a lot of people's favorite thing to, like, read about with historical fiction. Her and Brittany. It's not mine. It's just not something I've always gravitated towards. I always gravitate, with historical fiction, I gravitate towards, like, King Henry VIII and, like, that era. Or, like...
Which is also really cool.
Yeah. So, not really my usual cup of tea, but I loved this book so much. So we followed a girl named Liesel, who is an orphan, who gets adopted by these two parents, and they live in, I want to say, Austria. So it's in she moves in with these two people in Germany, and they end up, Liesel can't read, so her new dad starts teaching her how to read, and she falls in love with words. And then she meets a man who is, I think, like, late teens, early 20s, who is Jewish. And they end up hiding him in their basement, which is where then he starts taking over and teaching Liesel for a love of words, and just sort of grows that. So it's a lot of, like, Liesel learning how to read, and then all of the things with the Nazis, and hiding this man that she's, like, grown into this adoration, because she's only, like, 11 or 12, I think, in this book. But just getting all of these things, like, seeing it from the eyes of death is just so different, and so just read it. Do it.
So the last book I'm going to talk about today is Wild Magic by Tamora Pierce. Anyone who knows me, I reread this book at least once every year. I have it memorized, actually, for the most part, which, fun fact, is how I taught myself to read. This book follows a girl named Dane, and she is an orphan, basically. She's never known her father. Her mother was killed by raiders in July. No, her mother was killed by raiders the year that we meet her, and she has made her way down to a fair where she meets up with another character, and she basically gets hired on to help take care of all of these mountain ponies to take them to the king, for the king of the land, King of Tortal. And she, along the way, they run into different hardships and everything, and they discover that she has magic. And the magic that she has is what's known as wild magic. But what wild magic is, one, it's incredibly rare. And it's basically a connection with nature that goes beyond a normal connection. She can understand what animals are saying. And so she can speak to animals, and they can speak to her, and they end up noticing that the animals that spend more time around her are more intelligent, and they tend to organize their minds. They think through things. This does take place in Fantasyland, so there are dragons, there are orcs, there are trolls, there are centaurs, all of this stuff. We end up following Dane in this series as she and her close friend Numair end up trying to discover more about her magic and how she can control it, because the hard part is that it's very difficult for her to control. It's
Would you describe it as wild?
Yeah. Well, actually, that's one of the lines in the book. He's like, hence the name, wild magic. No one knows anything about it. And it's like, you're fine. But this whole thing kind of follows her, because she's actually like 13 when this book starts, and by the fourth book she's 17. So it goes about a year at a time. And we kind of watch her growing up. So, yeah, it's a lot of fun, and I love this world. This is really what got me into fantasy reading. I read this for a book club when I was in 5th grade. It was the first book we read, and I have not stopped reading it since. Basically. So
those are our top 3 favorite books. We obviously have so many other favorites. Narrowing this list down was really hard.
It took a while.
I'm sure, like, eventually we'll have just, like, each one of us talk about, like, our top 10. Then I might, like... So, currently, I am reading We Hunt the Flame by Hafsah Faizal. I'm, like, 100 and so pages in. 116, and so far it's just a lot of world building, but I'm enjoying the world right now. So I really like our 2 characters. So.
And I just started Every Heart a Doorway by Seanan McGuire. And I'm like 20 pages into this because I read it as I was falling asleep last night. But so far, it's really good. I'm really loving it. It's really cute, and I want to pick up the rest of the series now.
Yeah. So that is all we have today. Everything's in the description. You've heard the spiel.
Literally everything you could ever want and more. If you like this video, give it a thumbs up, and feel free to subscribe. Hit the bell icon if you want to be notified whenever we post new videos, Tuesday, Thursday, and Sundays. Alright, and we'll see you guys later. Bye!